Okay, we'll let any additional participants trickle in as they go, but for the sake of time, I think it makes sense to get started at this point. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Alex Wilson. I'm a tax and consulting principal in our Elma office. I'm joined today by Trevor Thomas and Emily Millsap from Avantax Planning Partners. This idea for this webinar was born sort of last year at looking holistically at agribusiness specific clients and navigating the estate environment. So just trying to get this topic more top of mind as there's certain estate laws right now that are in flux, making sure that, the timing is appropriate to look at everything. The cadence of the presentation, you only have to deal with me for a very brief amount of time. I'm going to kick it over to Trevor and Emily. If there are questions and whatnot, there is a chat box that myself and another Yo and Yo team member will be monitoring in the background. We will try to leave some time at the end for some general Q&A. This session is being recorded, and we ask, give us a couple of days afterwards. We'll try and get the follow-up information and other information disseminated at that point, and we'll go over with that. And from there, I'm going to kick it over to Trevor and Emily. One final thing, if you do have any sort of audio issues or anything like that, enter it into the chat, and we'll do what we can behind the scenes to assist. With that, Trevor and Emily, floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much. Good morning. My name is Emily Millsap, and I have the pleasure and honor of leading the financial planning team here at Avantax Planning Partners. Just to start, to make our compliance team happy, I'm going to share my screen with a disclosure that we have. If it can share for me. There it goes. So there's our quick disclosure, just so everybody can see that and read that. To give you a little background on the planning team here at Avantax Planning Partners, the planning team consists of 10 financial planners and myself, so you get 11 of us all together. And we do have a pretty broad array of areas of expertise. We have everything from enrolled agents specializing in tax to certified divorce financial analysts for people who may be going through things like that. I have a background in financial therapy as well, because we always try to make financial decisions and money about math and logic, but there's a lot of emotion that factors in, especially when we add family dynamics to a situation. And then, of course, everybody on the team is a certified financial planner professional as well. So to get started, I'm going to stop the share on the disclosure really quick. To get started, really to talk about where we would start the financial planning process, it starts with something that we call discovery. And that's really important because while your tax professionals know quite a bit about you, this is the first time that our financial professionals will get a chance to meet you. So it'll start with a conversation, and we'll just get to know as much about your situation as we possibly can. So everything from tell us about your family and all of the inner workings that are existing there to things about your business, things about your farm, what your vision for the future is, what your plans are to exit out of the business. And some of these things you may have a really solid picture and a really solid idea of what this looks like, and others maybe not quite so much. And those are things that we can kind of explore through conversation and do a lot of what if scenarios in the financial plan. So just to jump in and show you, we mocked up what something might look like for you. And I'll share my screen here again. This is what the first page would look like. It's just going to give you an overview of the financial situation. So after we've done that discovery and we've gathered all of that information, my team will go to work behind the scenes and put this together for you. So we'll start with the facts, the things that we know or the things that we have assumed, and we can get really detailed on this. So we'll walk through current ages, what the anticipated retirement ages might be, the end of plan life expectancy based on what you've seen in your family. We'll put your kids in there, any professional contacts, if there are any business partners, all of those things. We can put all of the important people here. From that point, if we know what your financial priorities are, we can add those here. So maybe we've got retirement planning, we've got caring for aging parents and minimizing taxes, and then we can add, spouses as well. And maybe they're a little bit different. Maybe they're investing, we'll put minimizing taxes there as well. And maybe we've got some charitable intent there. And as life changes, we can change these priorities also. So we can switch and move, things up and down. And it's okay between spouses that our priorities don't always align. It's really helpful for us to have this conversation sooner than later so we can make sure that everybody's on the same page. From that point, we can walk through your balance sheet. And I won't go too terribly detailed into this. I'll just kind of do broad strokes here, but we can outline all of your cash assets to see how much is sitting on the sidelines currently. We'll take a look at investments. So maybe we have a taxable account. We've got a simple IRA for the business. There's a 403B. We've got some cash value in some life insurance here as well. And then we have real estate. So we've got about 1,000 acres of land. We've got your home. There's a shop, barn, and improvements that are listed here. We've got some grain, some machinery and equipment, some vehicles, and then we can put the liabilities in here as well. So if we've got mortgages or any other types of debt, we can add those. And then anything that's currently outside of the estate, so irrevocable trusts or 529 plans, things like that, we can list those here as well. So that'll give us a pretty good overview of ownership and current net worth and where all of that lands. From that point, we can take a look at income, and Trevor's going to go into this in a little more detail in a little bit, but just to do a quick overview, we've got current income that's coming in, so the salary that we're paying ourselves and any other salaries that may be coming in from a spouse. We can forecast what Social Security might look like and list that in there as well. We've got a pension that's out here, and then we've got some active farming income coming in as well. From that point, we'll take a look at what our expenses are. So the first section here for living expenses, that's going to be after tax actual spending for what we have for most of our expenses. So we've got current spending at about 80,000, planning on about 100,000 in retirement because maybe we're going to travel a little or start some new hobbies. And then we've got the liability payments that are listed here on top of what those living expenses are. We've got some charitable giving. We've got a wedding to plan for. We've got some health insurance expenses listed here. There's that retirement travel for about 30,000 there. And then we have insurance premiums, federal and state taxes are factored in also. From that point, we can also take a look at what we're currently contributing into retirement plans or other investment accounts, things like that. So here we have about 10,000 going into the simple IRA and then the employer contribution of 2%. And we've got the 403B that's got a 5% contribution and then a match of 3% there as well. And then we also want to take a look at what protection assets are currently in place. So when we're thinking about risk mitigation, those types of things, we want to make sure life insurance is really listed out so that we can run an analysis on that. If there's any disability insurance in place, we want to make sure we can talk about that as well. If there are umbrella policies, those types of things, long-term care insurance, all of those kind of protection asset pieces we want to take a look at. Because when we go into the decision center and we start running different what if scenarios and things like that, it helps us to see what's currently in place so we can see if there are any gaps that are there that we maybe would need to fill and those types of things as well. And it's really important for us to know any family dynamics that might play into this. So if there are any children with special needs or if there's any friction anywhere in the family, so we can start to build a plan around those pieces also. So what we'll want to make sure we do is make this look as much like your real life as we possibly can. And some things are going to be very, very clear. We'll be able to outline very quickly. Some things we'll have to make some assumptions around, things that are projecting out in the future, like how much we're truly going to need to live on in retirement and those types of things. But the key is that every couple of years or as things materially change in your life, we're going to come back together and we're going to update your financial plan because life does like to do life things and it'll throw us curveballs from time to time. So we'll want to make sure we get back together pretty frequently and update your financial plan as life changes or even as your vision of what that future might be would change. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Trevor so he can talk with us about the next part of the financial plan, which is the most fun part where we get to get really dynamic and see how things change.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm sharing my screen right now. And as Emily alluded to, this is where we kind of get into the moving parts of the plans. So going through those base facts, reminding us, who am I? What cash flows am I looking at? What does my balance sheet look like? That's a snapshot of today. Once we have that confirmed with our clients, we have some more confidence in what things might look like in the future. We look at that in both the short term and the long term. So after we establish what today looks like, we start looking at what's coming up around the bend. And this is something that we should all be familiar with in concept, a 5-year cash flow report. Right down the center, we have 2025, 4 more columns, 4 more years. And we start to bring those isolated components of your plan together to show how they work in the sandbox, so to speak. So we keep track of the dollars coming in, different sorts and types, different cash flows going out. And these might be changing sooner rather than later based upon what debt structure looks like, charitable intent, etc. But what we need to do is keep an eye on what our net cash flows look like. So once we have some confidence developed in that short-term plan, we then say, all right, well, tell me what the big picture looks like. What does this mean for me? And how does it relate to those goals that we've established with our trusted advisors? And so this gets all the numbers off the page. Some of us are more visual learners than we are playing with numbers. And what this graph really tries to do is bring home what direction am I going with in a personal aspect, but also my operation. And so this ties back not only to you, am I going to be okay? But the further to the right we go down this timeline, it starts to affect those that are important to us, wife, children, business partners, etc. as well. And so just to kind of get into what are we looking at, this is a timeline for the rest of our plan for this hypothetical client. We see some tokens down here. Congratulations to Carol. Congratulations to Bob. Bob, congratulations, age 100. We keep going down and say, all right, these columns represent our liquid portfolio dollars, wealth of mine that I can spend. Doesn't count acres, doesn't count buildings, doesn't count farm implements. These are dollars that I have available to go buy groceries. And what we want to do, and it's a balance depending on which stage of your operation that you're in, making sure that we are growing our assets. It might be purchasing more equipment, more acres, but also growing it on a personal side. Because depending on where your assets are located, you need to be able to access them to go do the things that you want to do. And so the relative height of each of these columns represents those dollars available to spend. And in this hypothetical, we see a couple of inflection points here. We've got some debt being retired, assets accruing until the first retirement happens. We have them growing until about age 70 when Bob decides it's time to really back off of operations. This jump here is when a planned sale takes place. Okay. There's also some inheritance that we'll get into further down the line that's going to cause some changes on this graph. But the point is, depending on what your situation is, we're able to anticipate and start to map the impacts of those little things that we can expect in life. We don't know when possibly a parent's going to die and I'm going to inherit some land, but we know that it's going to happen at some point. The question is, where should we start to think reasonably that this could start to play into the plan? So another little inflection point down here, which we'll get into later, there's a relatively small but significant drop in those portfolio assets. And we're going to get into why on that, because that is a planning point of conversation as well. So this is where we start to play what if. We've already established what we think we can expect in that next 5-year period. We know big picture, the direction we're going, and we have some confidence into it. But we also now get to start playing what if. What are the opportunities that are out there that can help benefit my plan, help ensure those assets go efficiently down to my heirs? What are the risks to my plan if things perhaps don't go the way I thought they were going to this morning when I woke up. And what we're going to start to do here, and this is an exercise, as Emily mentioned, that we go through every 6 to 12 months with our clients. Sometimes, if life happens unexpectedly, we have off-schedule meetings. Hey, I have this opportunity. Neighbor passed away. I have adjoining land that's up for sale. I'd like to see if I can get in on that. Can I afford to? Long-term, how does it affect my operation? This is when we get to start modeling that, and we're going to see this series of columns start to change with those hypotheticals that we're adding in. So growth rates, we all know that, S&P 500 goes up and down every day. Your money market and CDs advance a little more slowly, but surely over time. These blue bars in this situation, we have growing at about 3.5%. That's relatively conservative, but depending on what your balance sheet looks like, cash to investments, that might be closer to reality than another person. But this allows us to say, well, what if we were to get 5% on those cash assets? How much does that change the needle if I increased my risk, but also return? And we can see a little bit of green on top of all these columns that is designed to show a positive departure from our base plan hypothesis. So obviously, get a little bit more money on your investments, things look better long term. Another item that we need to go through regularly are living expenses. That is something that you have perhaps more control over, but it allows us to say if we originally thought we were going to be spending $80,000 a year and it's actually 100 right now, how tenable is that? Well, we can see an extra 25% of discretionary spending on the personal side of your life could be detrimental and cause that cash crunch, which precludes us from other opportunities that might come up along the way. So again, this is all maintenance to a certain extent. We go through and we check, how are things going? Anything that's keeping you up at night, anything that's coming up that you think we want to take a look at, but also confirming those initial entries that we built the plan around. Life changes, this is designed to change with it. Once we get those kind of baseline variables nailed down, retirement ages, growth rates, expenses, things like that, we have the ability to get into some more advanced planning techniques. And really, we try to separate these techniques out into three main aspects of how it affects you from a financial, personal, and operation standpoint. One, we have to look at cash flows and our liquidity in our portfolio. We want to make sure there are assets. This subsection of your net worth isn't too small in the ratio. We need to make sure you have the ability to go do the stuff you like to do. The second theater that we operate in is tax. We partner with Yo and Yo. CPA partnerships is kind of our niche market. We work to make sure the recommendations that we develop, the strategies that we bring to you are tax efficient, and we're keeping an eye on that bottom line year over year when we say maybe there's a Roth IRA opportunity. Maybe we can put more away in the 401k to shield some income from taxation. That definitely factors into the strategies that we bring to the table. The final kind of theater that we operate in is estate. And we all have heard that there is possibly some changes coming to our federal estate tax law with the Republican sweep of House, Senate, and presidency. That is probably going to be changing. So we're keeping an eye on that because that does affect the conversations that we're having. But if there's something that we know is going to be constant, is dying isn't free anymore. And the question is, how do we get those assets transferred as efficiently as possible? That dying isn't free concept is illustrated right here. There's something called probate. We'll get into that and how we can try to minimize that in a few minutes. But let's start talking about that first area that we want to focus on, making sure you're okay, that cash flow and personal financial projection. So again, we've got a bar graph here. It's getting taller in later years, but that's because a few different things are happening. The operation is growing. Cash flows are paying down debt, which eventually frees up cash flow for more opportunities, be it investment in the business or your portfolio. But also in the background, we are factoring in inflation. That was a topic that was pretty in the front of mind for the last couple of years. It's still there, and we want to make sure we're addressing that. But when we look at a client's plan, we start to say, okay, what are the cash flows, that 5-year projection? What can we do right now to help improve things or set us up for future success in 5, 10 years? Or what are the long-term strategies that we should be looking at that may not make or break things right now, but incrementally build up this plan so we have greater confidence in our future retirement? And the first thing is that cash management component. You know, right now it might be paying down debt because you just bought some land. It might be hiring more people to help. You know, prices on your inputs might be going up. There's always that cash management problem that we're going to have year over year. But what we try to do is evaluate, is there any wiggle room in that where we can start to redirect some of those funds to help accomplish those long-term goals instead of just being blinded and looking at just what's coming up around the bend. And so what we like to do is say, all right, what if we were to take some of those excess dollars at the end of the year and just start putting them into a different sort of savings vehicle that's not a CD, that's not a money market, that is designed to have some higher future appreciation. We can be tax intelligent when we do it and go through pursuing municipal strategies, tax efficient investing. And we see this bar graph really change out here because that's when cash flows free up, because that's when the operation starts to change. But even investing 50 cents on the dollar when it frees up after retirement, we can see that portfolio really start to accumulate and develop more wealth on your personal side. Another thing that we need to consider is start sketching out, what does backing away from the operations look like? Usually we start from square one and say, all right, if I just lock the shop up and walk away and everything is just collecting dust, can I afford to do that? Or do I need to develop some continuation plan beyond just leaving it to my kids? You know, what does rental look like? Is there a sale in the future? Is there something more complex that I can do that accomplishes retirement goals, but also helps ease the burden from that estate tax standpoint, so it minimizes the portion of your assets you give to the government when you just so happen to die? And so going through that, we start to say, what are the effects of doing nothing? Is that one going to generate success? And can we tolerate the friction on that plan if that do nothing plan is what we end up accepting? And the first thing that happens is maybe we just walk away and sell the equipment at retirement. How does that help? Well, we empty out the shed, it goes up for auction, and there's that liquidity event there. So machines are all gone, but that means someone's got to work the land with their own machines. That may not be feasible from an execution standpoint. So again, that do nothing plan of walking away may not solve all of our problems. Secondly, we want to look at how you're paying yourself for retirement. We don't all have pensions anymore. Those days are gone. But because you're business owners, you need to start keeping an eye out for yourself, because you're both the employer and the employee, and you want to make sure you're funding that retirement along the way, because no one's going to do it for you anymore. So perhaps you have what's known as a simple IRA. The name gives it away. It's very easy to set up. However, funding limits are a little bit lower than other retirement plans. And we're going to work with your CPA to determine, are there any strategies out there that can accomplish the same investment strategies, but also increase the amount of the deferrals that I can make and shield income from a pre-tax investment perspective? And that's something that we have an entire department that works on, retirement plan services. But we can do an evaluation from a cash flow and tax standpoint and say, yeah, maybe it's better that we stop funding that simpler retirement plan that we've had in place and switch to something that has more tax deferral capabilities like a solo 401k that allows you to defer more personal dollars as an employee, but also fund it from an employer standpoint. So you can increase that funding level, but also increase the tax deferral from a business and personal standpoint. So we're going to make a quick change here and see how that affects these blue bars. So some meaningful impact there, and we see it starting relatively early. So the change that's happening here is one, increased dollars into the liquid portfolio. It is earmarked for retirement, but it's simultaneously reducing that tax burden on an annual basis. And so we're getting that double benefit of reducing taxes, increasing investment into our personal portfolio. And we can see we don't need to count as much on those transactions when I decide I'm done farming to make sure retirement's okay, because we're paying ourselves ongoing on an annual basis in a tax efficient manner along the way. Again, this whole thing is designed to minimize our risk and increase the probabilities of success in those years where you're finally not working and doing the stuff you actually want to do. Okay. So I'm going to turn these off because we can isolate some of these transactions. We also need to account for inheritance. You know, a lot of farm families that I've worked with are intergenerational. So I farm because I was brought into it by my dad. He was brought into it because of his dad, etc. Sometimes you want your kids, maybe kids, to have that legacy. Sometimes they're interested in it, and sometimes they say, no, thanks, I want to go be a dentist or something. We can try to play into those what ifs as well. But what you can see here is, let's say you have that windfall. Heaven forbid someone passes away before their time, but we know that depending on what their plan is, you might come into some extra acreage somewhere in the next 10 to 15 years just based on American demographics. And so what this does, you see a little extra cash flow, not accompanied by any sort of debt service, just increasing your production capabilities without having to pay the bank. Yeah, that's going to help the plan. But what we can see down here at retirement, that net worth number is getting larger. A lot of it is tied up in real estate, black dirt. The government doesn't necessarily care about where the wealth is. They want to make sure they can tax it. So that windfall when you're in your 50s, 60s is great. That helps you get where you're going, but it begets another problem later on when it's time for you to think about transitioning your operation down to your heirs. So there's ways to address that we'll get into a little bit further down. Let's talk about some of those more complicated transitions to our heirs, because we already talked about walking away. Maybe that works for us. Great if it does. Perhaps though, your goals are such that they require a little bit additional pre-planning to make sure they go off without a hitch. Now, in this situation, Bob and Carol have 2 kids. Their son, Chad, is actively operating the farm, helping grow the operations. Diane is pursuing other professional ventures. But the initial conversation around the kitchen table is, I want my son to get the farm to make sure he can continue the family legacy, but also make sure he can continue to provide for his family, putting food on the table. I want to make sure he has those tools that he's helped develop. And the question is, can we afford to do that either now or at death, that transition, and also to make sure things are fair between the kids? And so depending on the relationship and the transaction, you might be able to sell that farmland to your heir, and you might even be able to take advantage of discounting to make that transaction a little more favorable to you from a tax and estate standpoint. Question is, can you afford to take that discount on the farm sale? In this situation, yeah, you can, but we also then start to evaluate how are we going to complete that transaction from a monetary cash flow? Is it going to be a lump sum? Probably not. So if it's going to be structured as a multi-year note, what terms are we looking at? What are interest rates? How do we slot this in so it's feasible from the buyer's perspective? I have to make enough money to pay for this land, also take care of myself, but also the seller's perspective. Can I afford to part with this income generating asset and transition it before I die or retire? So, that is still what I would term as a relatively simple transition strategy. A sale could be at a discount to someone that is related to you, could be fair market value to the guy across the street. So that is out there. But what we are seeing more and more of, especially as there's talk of a state tax law change, are more detailed transactions that take some time to construct, but what they can really do is leverage legal entities like trusts, still involving a sale, but allowing you to have some cake and eat it too while minimizing that taxation. So I'm going to break here, just kind of walk you through what we take a look at when we're getting to how does this transaction look. We do stop and take a look at what your tax burden is projected to be. Future tax law changes that are already legislated are accounted for in this. We see some variability in that long-term gross tax scenario. We also take a look at, before our regular conversations, are there any kind of shorter term tax opportunities that we should be having a conversation about? Maybe it's something that just popped up because of recent transactions or law change. We want to make sure that we're being mindful along the way getting to your retirement that we're not leaving any money on the table. Getting back to what I was alluding to with that dying isn't free anymore concept, we do take a look at how your estate is currently set up to transfer. Now, this is, as I mentioned, the kind of kitchen table conversation of asset flows. If I die and Carol's still here, I want her to get my stuff. If she dies before me, I want Chad to get the land and everything else is split. Chad, my son, everything else is split 50-50 between the kids. That might be conversation unless you have that in writing, get it signed and notarized by an attorney and paralegal. That strategy might be challenged or called into question after you pass away. So the idea of pre-planning is making sure we see, again, what are the procedures that we should be following? What do we need to get in writing and when? And what are the outcomes? Because right now, down the line, if everything goes to plan, we're looking at federal estate tax exposure of $1 million, probate and expenses total is 1.3 million. There's some other costs associated with passing away, but our goal is to start to whittle that number down as effectively as possible to make sure your wealth is maintained and transferred down to your heirs. Now, this is that walk away, do nothing plan. Keep your eye on that orange box. If we start implementing some of these strategies, investing excess cash flow, adding the 401k, inheriting some land, we see that net worth as second death has grown, and that, hey, these are good things along the way, begets that larger problem at the end of the line. So the question is, how do we start to address that? Is there anything we can do today to head off a problem later? And I would say the answer is yes. Depending on which strategies we have available to us, what your personal balance sheet and estate plan goals are, we've done some pretty dynamic work on reducing that orange box. We're playing by the rules. We are compliant with tax and legal, but making sure we're taking into consideration all of those separate strategies. So we'll get back to that estate flow chart. But right now, we've got this pretty good looking trend. We're developing liquidity because we're making good decisions along the way, but we want to start talking about when this sunset comes on. This is assuming, initially we were assuming Bob retires, starts running the land, sells his equipment, everything is fine. But we want to make sure we're not leaving any money on the table. And so what we've been seeing more and more recently is developing family LLCs or family limited partnerships as a business entity strictly to hold the assets that make up the bulk of this net worth number, meaning land, could be equipment as well, because that allows us to start to transition to family members that either are involved in the operation or not involved, depending on which way you structure the business entity. But it also allows for secondary transactions where you can sell, reap the economic benefits of a sale, and still minimize that orange box that we looked at down the line because we're getting it out of our estate sooner rather than later, but still managing to monetize it. So what we're going to do here is start to simulate one of those transactions. And Alex will tell you all about discounting at a private meeting, but essentially it allows you to gift or sell assets for less than full value because it helps from a tax standpoint. The goal is still accomplished, transitioning the assets. You still get some money out of it if it's a sale, but it helps smooth those rough points on the transaction. So this is going to add a family LLC. There will be controlling interest and non-controlling interest. And we're going to now transfer the ag land into that family LLC. And again, this is a setup step for making sure we can get that transition accomplished, especially now, while personal exemptions and estate tax are high, historically speaking. Currently, they're about $13 million a person, meaning you and your wife get about 26. Pending tax law change, that might get cut in half starting 1/1/2026. So a lot of people that don't have an estate problem per se today might have one 12 months from now. So this is why this has kind of been a hot conversation topic. And so once we transition the farm into this business entity, it's still operating. It is still, paying out depending on how we structure that ownership and income. But what this eventually gets to is, how do we make that transition? Does it need to be out here when I die? Can it be at retirement? Or does it make more sense to do it sooner rather than later and take advantage of some of those current tax law opportunities? And what this ends up doing is it sells your business interest into a trust. The trust then pays you over maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe 15 years, depending on your operation, out for that land. And then the trust continues to own the farmland, continues to operate and generate income to provide for you, to provide for your spouse as long as she lives, but then at second death, transfers those assets down to your heirs. Estate tax essentially has already been prepaid on those assets we got into the trust, while your personal exemption is high. So that's what gets back to that having cake and eating it too point. So I'm going to flip this thing on just so we can see the bar graph change real quick. We see that series of columns kick up here is because we're actually selling that farm business entity to that trust sooner rather than later. How does that affect us in the long game? We're going to take a look at where we stand with those orange boxes. And if it was 10,500,000 now, we have reduced that estate tax burden from that 10 million down to 7.5. We can't solve all the problems, but we can start to address it. An additional consideration is we haven't even addressed what those legal documents look like. So I'm sure you've all got an attorney that you work with. By your stage in the game, you've probably got a will in place. Might be kind of dusty. You probably got it when your kids were born. It might be time to revisit that and make sure it has some provisions that we can help you kind of identify. But if we make sure just your base documents are drafted correctly for efficiency, add your transfer on death notes, add your pour over wills to reduce probate, again, we're chiseling away at that probate expense. Every change we make kind of adjusts these numbers. And so it's a balancing act to a certain extent, but that's why these decisions aren't made overnight. This needs to be a conversation that is going to take its own time. You're going to have to go home and think about some things. And then we still need to get legal documents drafted, blah, 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 blah. It's a process, but I think we can demonstrate value for it. So that is how we start to address your current portfolio, how it really supports that eventual retirement, how we're taking current income and estate tax law into consideration when we're structuring transitions. But we also want to make sure somewhere along the way, if something bad happens, we're covered. So I'm going to, again, isolate some of these transactions. And one aspect that we do evaluate is risk management. It's something that's not a lot of fun to talk about, but it's better to have it if you need it than not. Trust me when I say life can throw you some curveballs. It might be life insurance if you look the wrong way crossing the street. It might be long-term care if you get older and you need assistance at your own house. You don't want to go to a nursing home facility. There's ways to protect yourself so you can do that at home. Or while you're working, if there is, heaven forbid, a disability, you're still with us, not able to produce the income that you thought you were going to. And so that is something that we definitely evaluate and continue to monitor. Heaven forbid, Bob has a disability event when he's 48. Problems ensue because he can't necessarily farm himself. He's going to have some disability we would recommend. He's going to start renting the farm early. He still has the assets. He's just not working them. But what we see here is there's still some pretty lean years, even with some income coming in through rental and disability. He's going to sell the crop, fire sale, because they might need liquidity. And that helps bridge that gap, whatever you had held up ready for sale. But again, we're trying to help address all the lost wealth that we had wanted to transfer, had been passed down to us, and we want to get to our next generation. And so, that is something that we can help defend against. We can show you what it looks like if you decide to accept the risk and just say, you know what, I'll take my chances. Totally legitimate decisions are what our role is. What we would like to help you do is understand all of those opportunities and all those risks so you can sleep at night knowing that you're still going to eventually retire, transition the farm to the kids, pay for a wedding, go travel for 15 years after you retire while you want to, and make sure we do it as efficiently as possible. So I've talked for a while. I'm going to take a sip of coffee. Now I think it's time for any questions.
Haven't seen any questions pop up in the chat, but if there are any out there, we would love to answer questions.
While folks are pondering if they have any questions or not, I will say at this point, when we created this profile and example plan, we intentionally made it very all-inclusive so that sort of all of the check boxes were met. We understand that everyone's situation is entirely different, whether it's size of the operation, more or less land, whether you're carrying more debt right now. Uh, all of this is still pertinent, and we believe it's still very relevant at the time being.
Yep, these plans are designed to be scalable. If it's not a 1,000-acre operation and it's only 500, those adjustments can be made live in conversation if need be. This is designed to be very flexible and tailored to you.
I'm still not seeing any questions pop up in the chat. So maybe we did a great job and explained everything in a way that there are no questions.
Lot to chew on. So
It is a lot. Just to circle back to some things that I said at the beginning, each situation is going to be a little bit different. Family dynamics always play into how we're going to transition a business to the next generation. Lots of different pieces will layer in. Even if you think a balance sheet may look similar to, someone that you know who's in a really similar situation, when you start to put in your view for the future and your goals for retirement and all of those different really personal components, the outcome of the plan could look very, very different. So we would love to offer this experience to every single one of you to walk through the discovery process. Let us help build your financial plan, start to model that vision for the future that you have, all of the different what if scenarios, and all of that. Okay, great question about how long does developing a plan take? 6 months, a year? Um, we'll put an initial plan together very, very quickly. So within just a couple of months from the time we do the discovery to the time we sit back down and walk through the initial plan, it'll take just a couple of months, and then we'll start to use that as our baseline to do tweaks and edits along the way. And then the plan becomes a living, breathing part of your business and your family at that point, where we'll get together on a very regular basis and do updates and check in on the balance sheet, see how things are going, what's changed in your life. Are your feelings about X, Y, and Z still the same, or have those changed? So I would say initially it's pretty quick. If we do that discovery process and get really great information from you in the beginning, we'll get it together pretty fast for you, and then it'll continue to grow and evolve over time. Great question. All right.
I th
Are you able to access the plan and run hypotheticals on your own, or does it need to go through us? Really good question. So the answer is a little bit of both. So we do have online access. Once we get your plan in place that we can give you, you will have limited access to maybe change a few things, update accounts, do things like that. But by and large, most of the big changes will be made by my team. And you just let us know if something happens and you want to see some changes. We'll schedule a meeting, we'll get back together, and we'll make those changes and do that update for you. So a little bit of both is the answer to that question.
we had
and
a
be
we had a follow-up question in the chat as well about how it works, whether or not there's a yearly contract, an initial contract. I'll sort of defer to you guys for how the process sort of flows.
Yep. So we would love to work with you across the board on your retirement plans, any investments that you have, all of those types of things. Our planning is included in that client relationship. There are opportunities to do fee for plan engagements if you don't want us to manage assets, help with retirement plans, those types of things. We don't see those very often. By and large, we do end up working with clients on their investments and things like that. And then again, planning is included as part of that client relationship.
There's another Q&A about how do you balance servicing operations, debt requirements while providing for older generations retirement?
Really great question. And that's pretty dynamic. The what's and the whys of how we can structure those different things are pretty varied. And so it would start with a conversation of what are all of the goals that we're hoping to accomplish here? Do we anticipate additional debt that we're going to be taking on along the way? If so, is that going to be fairly consistent? What's that going to look like? What's the income of the operation currently? Is there any wiggle room either to increase that income in some creative ways or just push some additional cash flow out? So it's going to be really case by case. It's going to start with that conversation of what are all of the goals we're trying to accomplish and what are the resources we have to work with to accomplish those goals. And then we'll see how we can either, make some strategic changes to help achieve those goals or maybe grow in certain areas to help achieve those goals as well.
One thing I would add to that remark is that quite often we work with families intergenerationally. I'm
Yes.
working on a separate case for someone, and mom and dad selling the business to trust for the kids. Well, if that transaction actually occurs, we're already working with generation two on their plan to make sure they can cash flow and pay off mom and dad and the trust when they take over those operations. So very often this is a multifaceted conversation. There is confidentiality, barriers in between individuals, but quite often we're looking at those transactions, making sure generation behind is taken care of. So I'm looking at my stuff and also providing for the generation beneath me. It gets into a very comprehensive plan. And I think that it really helps us make sure everyone's protected and we're maximizing the wealth that we have available.
And then the only thing I will add to that, the earlier we start, the better. The more time that we have, the more runway that we have, the more that we can do from a planning perspective. So very good question. I'll give it a minute and see if there are any additional questions that might pop in. These were really great.
While we're in the waiting period for potential additional questions, again, I'll reiterate that in the coming days after this, there will be, this webinar was recorded, and there will be some additional information along with the recording that we will blast out to everyone via email. Certainly, if you have questions or would like to kind of see what it would take, certainly reach out to your Yo and Yo advisor, and we're happy to sort of get the ball rolling. While that happened, another Q&A came in with questions about revocable versus irrevocable trust in terms of how we deploy those strategies in these plans.
Yes, great question. So we absolutely include estate planning as part of our planning offering. My team, we are not estate planning attorneys and we do not give legal advice, but what we do is we'll review your current existing documents, revocable trust, irrevocable trusts, all of your advanced directives, pour over wills, et cetera. And we'll build in, here's what you currently have. So here's how what you currently have flows. And then we can do those what if scenarios, just like we modeled with the intentionally defective grantor trust. What if we added this, or what if we changed this? How would that impact your plan? How would that impact taxes over time? How would that help you achieve your goals or maybe negatively impact your goals? And so we can look at different things. And then we really love it when we can bring the estate planning attorney to the table and show them, here's what we were thinking. If we model it this way, here's how this looks. What are your thoughts? Get their input as the legal expert there. But it is such an important part of everything that we do, especially since we can't make very many guarantees in our line of work with markets and whatnot. But one thing we can guarantee is tax laws will go in and out of our favor over time. So estate planning documents are something that we do have to update fairly often in light of changing tax laws and changing estate legislations and things like that. So we absolutely love it when we get those estate documents to review. We can add those into the plan and help make sure that what you have in place is first and foremost exactly what you want, but also working the best that it can for you.
And a chat came in regarding about presentation slides being available to kind of keep spurring thoughts. So again, what Trevor was demonstrating was more of an example live format. There aren't necessarily any tangible slides. However, there will be some separate information that we disperse out with the recording that will do that. And certainly your Yo and Yo advisor has information. that can kind of get the ball rolling and kind of help spur those thoughts if you have that. So I would recommend reaching out if you do have additional questions sort of in the interim.
All right, I don't see any additional questions in chat.
If there are any questions that come in, obviously after the fact, or if it's more of an isolated question or inquiry, certainly our contact information is available. You can send emails or reach out to a Yo person. We're happy to loop in the appropriate Avantax member. On behalf of Trevor, Emily, and the Avantax team, I just want to say thank you for everyone who was able to join, and look out in your inbox in the coming days for some more information. And if there's anything else that you need, please reach out to your Yo advisor.